there comes a moment in life when you become tired of being underestimated, overlooked, and misunderstood. Your value is not something that is created in the eyes of others. It does not suddenly appear when someone praises you, and it does not disappear when someone ignores you. It exists long before any recognition, long before any approval, and long before anyone decides to see it. But the problem is not the absence of value. The problem is the absence of awareness. Many people move through life waiting to be chosen, waiting for someone to validate their existence, their worth, their importance. They measure themselves through reactions, through attention, through compliments, through acceptance. And when these things are present, they feel elevated. When they are absent, they feel diminished. This creates a fragile identity, one that is constantly dependent on external conditions. But when your sense of worth depends on something outside of you, it can be taken away just as easily as it is given. A change in someone's mood, a shift in circumstances, a single moment of rejection. And suddenly you begin to question yourself. You begin to shrink, to doubt, to adjust who you are, just to regain what you think you lost. This is where confusion begins, because you start believing that your value is something that needs to be earned, negotiated, or proven. You start overextending yourself, trying to be more agreeable, more available, more acceptable. You give more than you should, not from a place of generosity, but from a place of fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind, fear of not being seen. And slowly, without realizing it, you move further away from yourself. When you do not recognize your own value, you become easily influenced by the opinions of others. A single criticism can outweigh 10 compliments. A moment of silence can feel like rejection. You begin to read into everything, searching for meaning where there is none, attaching your worth to interpretations that are often not even real. But awareness changes this. The moment you begin to see your value as something internal, something stable, something that is not dependent on approval, your entire perspective shifts. You stop asking, do they see my worth? And you begin asking, am I honoring my worth? This question changes your behavior, because once you recognize your value, certain things no longer feel acceptable. Not because you are trying to prove something, but because you can clearly see what aligns with you and what does not. You become less reactive, less desperate for validation, less willing to compromise your standards for temporary acceptance. You begin to understand that not everyone will recognize your value, and that is not a problem. Not everyone has the awareness, the depth, or the clarity to see it. And instead of trying to convince them, you simply step back, not out of pride, but out of understanding. There is a quiet confidence that comes from this awareness. It is not loud, it does not seek attention, and it does not need constant reinforcement. It is steady, it is grounded. It allows you to move through situations without constantly questioning yourself. You no longer chase approval because you are no longer defined by it. And when you stop chasing, something interesting happens. You begin to observe more. You see people and situations more clearly without the distortion of needing something from them. You notice who respects you without you asking. You notice where your presence is valued naturally, without force or effort. This awareness gives you clarity, and clarity gives you choice. You start choosing differently. You choose environments that reflect your standards. You choose relationships that feel balanced, not draining. You choose actions that align with your self-respect, not your insecurities. And even when you are alone, there is no sense of lack. Because your value is no longer something you are trying to extract from the world. It is something you carry within yourself, consistently, quietly, without needing to prove it to anyone. Misalignment begins quietly. It does not arrive with noise or warning. It shows up in small moments, in subtle decisions, in the space between what you say you want and what you continue to accept. You say you want respect, yet you laugh off behavior that crosses your boundaries. You say you want peace, yet you keep returning to environments that disturb your mind. You say you want honesty, yet you remain silent when something feels wrong. These contradictions seem small in isolation, but over time, they begin to shape your inner world. There is a tension that forms when your words and your actions move in opposite directions. At first, it is easy to ignore. You distract yourself, justify your choices, tell yourself that it is temporary, that things will change, that you just need to be patient. But the body and the mind are not easily deceived. They recognize inconsistency and they respond to it. This response often appears as discomfort, a feeling you cannot fully explain, restlessness in quiet moments, overthinking at night, a sense that something is not right, even when everything looks fine on the surface. This is not confusion without reason. This is awareness trying to reach you. When you continue to act against what you know is right for you, you begin to lose trust in yourself. Not all at once, but gradually. You hesitate more. You question your instincts. You look to others for answers that you already carry within you. Because deep down, you know that you have been ignoring your own voice. This is where suffering begins. Not because life is inherently difficult, but because you are moving in a direction that is not aligned with who you are. You start to feel drained even when you have done nothing physically exhausting. Conversations feel heavier than they should. Decisions feel more complicated than they need to be. You carry a weight that does not belong to the present moment, but to the accumulation of choices that went against your own understanding. In this state, even small problems begin to feel overwhelming. Your patience becomes thinner. Your reactions become stronger. You may find yourself irritated by things that normally would not affect you. This is not because you are weak. It is because your energy is being consumed by internal conflict. And the more you ignore this conflict, the louder it becomes. You may try to silence it with distractions, more work, more social interaction, more noise. But the moment you are alone again, it returns. That quiet voice reminding you that something is off, that you are not being fully honest with yourself. Honesty requires courage because it asks you to look at your own patterns without excuses. It asks you to admit where you have been settling, where you have been avoiding difficult decisions, where you have been choosing comfort over alignment. And this is not easy because alignment often requires change. It requires you to step away from what is familiar, to say no where you once said yes, to disappoint others in order to stop disappointing yourself. These are not comfortable actions, but they are necessary if you want to restore balance within yourself. When your actions begin to match your understanding, something shifts. The tension starts to dissolve. The noise in your mind becomes quieter. Decisions become clearer, not because life has become simpler, but because you are no longer divided within yourself. There is a certain stability that comes from this. You move with more certainty, even in uncertain situations. You do not need constant reassurance because you are no longer questioning your own direction at every step. Dullment does not mean perfection. It does not mean you will always make the right choice. But it means you are paying attention. It means you are willing to correct yourself when you notice the gap between what you believe and how you act. And each time you close that gap, you strengthen something within yourself that cannot be easily shaken. Self-betrayal does not happen in one dramatic moment. It is not a single decision that changes everything at once. It is a pattern repeated quietly, often unnoticed, until it becomes part of the way you live. It begins when you ignore something small, a feeling that tells you, this is not right, a moment where you should speak, but you remain silent, a boundary that is crossed, and instead of addressing it, you dismiss it to keep the peace. At first, it feels easier this way. You avoid conflict. You maintain harmony. You tell yourself that it is not a big deal. But every time you ignore that inner signal, you send a message to yourself. You say, without words, that your needs are not important enough, that your discomfort can be tolerated, that your voice can wait. Over time, this message becomes familiar. You start to prioritize the expectations of others over your own well-being. You become more concerned with being liked than being respected. You adjust your behavior to fit into spaces that do not truly support you. And the more you do this, the more you distance yourself from your own center. There is a cost to this, even if it is not immediately visible. You may begin to feel exhausted without understanding why. You give your time, your energy, your attention, yet it rarely feels enough. Not because you are incapable, but because you are operating from a place of imbalance. You are pouring into situations that do not pour back into you, and you continue doing so because you have learned to ignore the signals that tell you to stop. This is where your sense of value begins to weaken, not because you have less value, but because you are no longer treating yourself as someone valuable. Your actions start to contradict your worth. You tolerate what you should not tolerate. You accept less than what you know you deserve. And each time you do this, it reinforces the belief that this is all you can expect. This belief is not formed through words. It is formed through repetition. When you consistently choose others over yourself in situations where your own needs are being compromised, you teach yourself that your role is to adjust, to accommodate, to endure. And eventually, this becomes automatic. You no longer question it. You no longer pause to ask whether something is right or wrong for you. You simply continue because it has become your normal. But the body and mind do not fully accept this as truth. There is always a part of you that resists, a quiet tension that does not go away. It may show up as frustration, as overthinking, as a sense of emptiness that you cannot explain. This is not weakness. This is awareness that has been suppressed for too long. The longer self-betrayal continues, the more disconnected you become from your own instincts. You stop trusting your decisions because you have repeatedly ignored your own guidance. You look outside for direction, for reassurance, for validation, because your connection to yourself has been weakened. And without that connection, everything becomes uncertain. Situations that should be clear feel confusing. Decisions that should be simple feel overwhelming. You hesitate, not because you lack intelligence, but because you have trained yourself to doubt what you already know. Rebuilding this trust requires attention. It begins with noticing the moments where you are about to go against yourself. The small hesitations, the subtle discomfort, the quiet voice that suggests a different choice. Instead of pushing it aside, you allow yourself to acknowledge it. This does not mean you will change everything immediately, but awareness creates space. And in that space, you begin to see your patterns more clearly. You recognize where you have been saying yes out of fear, where you have been staying out of comfort, where you have been giving without balance. And once you see it, it becomes difficult to ignore. Each time you choose to act in alignment with yourself, even in small ways, you begin to repair something that was weakened. You show yourself that your voice matters, that your needs are not secondary, that you are not here to continuously sacrifice your well-being for the approval of others. And with each of these choices, your sense of value becomes stronger, not as an idea, but as something reflected through the way you live. Discipline is often misunderstood. Many see it as restriction, as something that takes away freedom, as a force that limits what you can do. But in reality, discipline is what protects your freedom. It is what allows you to live in alignment with what you know is right. Even when it is not easy, without discipline, your actions are controlled by impulses, by moods that change throughout the day, by temporary emotions that feel strong in the moment, but quickly fade. You may know what is right for you. You may even clearly see what needs to be done. But without discipline, that understanding does not translate into action. This is where the gap forms between knowing and doing. You tell yourself you will walk away from what disrespects you. But when the moment comes, you hesitate. You tell yourself you will set boundaries. But when faced with resistance, you step back. You promise yourself change. But when comfort calls, you return to familiar patterns. It is not that you lack awareness. It is that awareness alone is not enough. Discipline is the bridge between your intentions and your reality. It is the ability to act according to your values, not according to your feelings, because feelings are unstable. They shift depending on circumstances, on energy, on external influences. If your decisions are based only on how you feel in the moment, you will continue to move in inconsistent directions. One day you feel strong, so you make a firm decision. The next day you feel uncertain, so you undo it. This cycle creates instability. And over time, it weakens your trust in yourself. Discipline interrupts this cycle. It allows you to follow through, even when motivation is low, even when emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. It gives you a structure to rely on when your internal state is unclear, not because you are forcing yourself, but because you have already decided what aligns with your values. Walking away from something that is familiar but no longer right for you requires discipline. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is simply choosing not to respond, choosing not to engage, choosing not to return. These choices may seem small, but they require strength, especially when part of you wants to go back. Remaining alone, rather than surrounding yourself with the wrong people, also requires discipline. There is a natural desire for connection, for belonging, for companionship. But not all connection is healthy, and not all presence is supportive. Without discipline, you may choose temporary comfort over long-term peace, simply to avoid feeling alone. Discipline helps you stay grounded in what truly matters, even when it is uncomfortable. Choosing growth over comfort is another expression of discipline. Growth often asks more from you. It asks for effort, for patience, for consistency. It does not provide immediate results. Comfort, on the other hand, is immediate. It requires nothing from you. It keeps you where you are, safe but unchanged. Without discipline, comfort becomes your default. You delay what needs to be done. You avoid what feels difficult. You convince yourself that there is always more time. But over time, this avoidance creates stagnation. You remain in the same patterns, facing the same challenges, because you have not built the capacity to move beyond them. Discipline changes this by introducing consistency. It is not about perfection. It is not about always getting it right. It is about showing up again and again, even when it is inconvenient, even when progress feels slow, even when no one is watching. Each time you act with discipline, you reinforce your self-respect. You prove to yourself that your words have weight, that your decisions are not temporary, that you can rely on yourself, regardless of how you feel in the moment. And this reliability becomes a foundation. You no longer need constant motivation because your actions are guided by something deeper. You no longer need external pressure because you have developed internal structure. Your behavior becomes more stable, more intentional, more aligned with who you are becoming. Discipline, in this way, is not a burden. It is a form of self-respect expressed through action. There is a tendency to believe that power must be displayed, that it needs to be seen, heard, and recognized in order to exist. People often feel the need to explain themselves, to justify their decisions, to make others understand why they think or act a certain way. They believe that if they do not speak up constantly, if they do not defend their position, they will be overlooked or misunderstood. But true power does not operate this way. It does not rely on constant expression. It does not need to convince. It does not need to prove. Silence, when used with awareness, becomes a form of strength. Not the silence of suppression, where you hold back out of fear, but the silence of clarity, where you choose not to engage because you see no value in doing so. There is a difference between being unable to speak and deciding that speaking is unnecessary. When you understand this difference, your behavior begins to change. You no longer feel the need to respond to every opinion, every comment, every misunderstanding. You begin to recognize that not every situation deserves your energy. Some conversations are not meant to lead anywhere meaningful. Some people are not open to understanding. And trying to force clarity in these moments only drains you. Silence allows you to conserve that energy. It gives you space to observe rather than react, to listen rather than immediately respond. In this space, you start to see things more clearly. You notice intentions behind words. You notice patterns in behavior. You begin to understand people, not just through what they say, but through how they act consistently over time. This awareness makes your responses more intentional. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond selectively. And sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Because when you refuse to engage in something that does not align with you, you are setting a boundary without needing to explain it. Boundaries are often misunderstood as something that must be declared loudly. People think they must clearly state their limits in every situation, otherwise they will be crossed. While communication has its place, true boundaries are reflected more through action than through words. When you stop participating in what disrespects you, that is a boundary. When you remove your presence from what drains you, that is a boundary. When you no longer make yourself available for what feels wrong, that is a boundary. These actions speak with more clarity than explanations ever could, because words can be ignored, questioned, or challenged. But consistent action is difficult to misunderstand. It creates a pattern that others begin to recognize. They see what you accept and what you do not because you told them repeatedly, but because your behavior made it clear. This kind of clarity does not require force. It is calm, steady, and consistent. It does not fluctuate depending on who you are dealing with. It does not weaken under pressure. It remains the same regardless of external reactions. And this consistency builds a quiet form of respect. People may not always agree with your boundaries. They may question them, test them, or even resist them. But over time, they begin to understand that your actions are not temporary, that you are not easily influenced, that your decisions are not based on momentary emotions. And this is where power becomes visible, not in loud declarations, not in constant explanations, but in the way you carry yourself, in the way you choose where to place your attention, in the way you remain composed when faced with situations that once would have pulled you in. There is a certain presence that develops from this. You become less reactive, less affected by external noise. You move with intention rather than impulse. Your words become fewer, but more precise. And because you do not speak unnecessarily, when you do speak, it carries more weight. This shift is subtle, but it is powerful. You are no longer trying to control how others see you. You are focused on maintaining alignment within yourself. And from that alignment, your actions naturally reflect your standards without needing to say much, without needing to prove anything. You begin to show exactly who you are through what you allow, what you decline, and where you choose to remain silent. Alignment is not something you declare. It is something you live. It is reflected in the smallest details of your daily behavior, in the choices you make when no one is watching, in the standards you maintain even when it would be easier to let them go. When your actions begin to match your understanding of your own worth, there is a shift that does not need to be announced. It becomes visible on its own, not through words, but through consistency. Before this alignment, there is often a sense of effort in everything you do. You try to maintain relationships that feel unbalanced. You try to fit into environments that do not reflect who you are. You try to convince others of your value, hoping they will eventually recognize what you already feel inside. This constant effort creates tension because you are moving against yourself. But when alignment begins, that tension starts to fade. You stop forcing connections that do not feel natural. You stop explaining yourself to those who are not willing to understand. You stop holding on to situations that require you to compromise your standards just to remain part of them. These decisions may seem difficult at first, but they create space. And in that space, something new begins to form. Your circle becomes smaller, not because you are isolating yourself, but because you are becoming more selective. You are no longer drawn to every opportunity, every conversation, every person who enters your life. You begin to notice who aligns with your energy and who does not. And instead of trying to make everything work, you allow things to fall into place naturally. The relationships that remain start to feel different. There is less confusion, less imbalance, less need to constantly adjust yourself. There is a sense of mutual respect where you do not feel the need to prove your worth and they do not feel the need to question it. This kind of connection is not built through effort alone, but through alignment. Your mind also begins to change. Before alignment, there is often noise, constant thinking, questioning, analyzing. You replay conversations. You anticipate outcomes. You worry about how you are perceived. This mental activity is a reflection of inner instability, of trying to control things that are not fully aligned. But when your actions match your values, that noise begins to quiet down. You think less about what you should do because your direction becomes clearer. You spend less time second-guessing yourself because your decisions are based on something stable. There is a sense of trust that develops not in external circumstances, but within yourself. This trust brings a different kind of focus. You become more present, more aware of what is in front of you, rather than constantly being pulled into what could go wrong. Your attention is no longer scattered across unnecessary concerns. It becomes more intentional, more directed. And with this clarity, your presence begins to change. There is a calmness that becomes noticeable, not because you are trying to appear calm, but because you are no longer in conflict within yourself. You are not divided between what you want and what you tolerate. You are not constantly adjusting your behavior to fit expectations that do not align with you. This calmness carries a certain strength. It is not aggressive. It does not demand attention, but it is felt. People notice it, even if they cannot explain it. There is a steadiness in the way you move, in the way you respond, in the way you hold yourself in different situations. And this steadiness influences everything around you. You attract different kinds of conversations, different kinds of opportunities, different kinds of people, not because you are actively searching for them, but because your alignment filters what enters your life and what does not. At the same time, certain things begin to fall away. Situations that once seemed important lose their significance. Patterns that once felt normal become uncomfortable. You start to recognize what no longer fits, and instead of trying to hold on, you allow it to pass without resistance. This process is not always easy, but it is natural. Because once you begin to live in alignment with your value, anything that contradicts it becomes difficult to maintain. Not because you are forcing change, but because your awareness no longer allows you to remain in what does not reflect who you are becoming. And as this continues, your life starts to organize itself around that alignment, shaping your experiences in a way that feels more stable, more intentional, and more true to you. In the end, nothing you have heard matters unless you are willing to live it. Understanding your value is not rare. Many people have moments of clarity. They feel it briefly. They recognize where they are settling, where they are compromising, where they are not being true to themselves. But then they return to old patterns, not because they do not know better, but because they do not act differently. This is where the real separation happens, not between those who know and those who don't, between those who act and those who hesitate. You can listen, reflect, agree with every word, and still remain in the same place. Because without action, awareness becomes useless. It becomes another idea that feels good for a moment, then fades. So the question is no longer, do you understand your value? The real question is, Are you ready to live according to it? Because once you decide, truly decide, there is no need for noise, no need for explanation, no need for permission. You simply begin. You begin to choose differently. You begin to respond differently. You begin to walk away where you once stayed. And these small, consistent shifts reshape everything. There will be moments of doubt, moments where it feels easier to return to what is familiar. But this is where your discipline, your awareness, and your self-respect must come together, not loudly, not forcefully, but steadily. Remember this. Your value does not increase when someone finally sees it. It was always there, but your life only begins to change when you stop waiting for others to recognize it and start living as if it already matters.